Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, Evaluating Foreign Business Partners, brought to you by the MAPIT Alliance, or the Maryland Partners in International Trade. This is the third in our series focusing on handling risks at each step of the export process. I'm Rebecca Bellinger. I'm the Executive Director at the Center for Global Business at the Robert H. Smith School of Business at the University of Maryland, College Park, and I will serve as your moderator this afternoon. I am joined by one of the premier experts in this field of due diligence, Alexandra Wragge, President and CEO of Trace International, which is headquartered here in Annapolis, Maryland, and by seasoned international sales director, Kim Vakari of Consul Pharmaceuticals based in Easton. Before we begin, I'll take a minute here to remind you of a few things to help us move smoothly through our agenda. First, this webinar is being recorded. It will be made available for future viewing via our website after today's session. We'll also handle questions via the Q&A function. Throughout the presentation at any time, please feel free to submit your questions there, and we'll try to get through as many as we can toward the end of the formal presentations. We'll have an evaluation for you at the end of the event today, and we thank you in advance for sharing your thoughts with us about the webinar. And finally, if there are any technical difficulties on our end or on yours, we thank you in advance for your patience. As mentioned, this webinar is brought to you by the MAPIT Alliance. MAPIT brings together key partners from industry, local, state, and federal government, and higher education in Maryland to raise awareness of existing export promotion programs, facilitate greater access to and usage of these resources, and build new, collaborative, globally focused educational programs to support exporters like you. The four members of MAPIT are, as you can see on your screen, the Maryland Department of Commerce, the USEAC, or the U.S. Export Assistance Center, or U.S. Commercial Service in Baltimore, the Maryland D.C. District Export Council, and the Center for Global Business. And this webinar series is just one of our many collaborative educational activities. After we hear first this afternoon from Alexandra and then from Kim, we'll take questions from the audience. We'll end by connecting you with a couple of resources from the MAPIT partners and provide you with our contact information for further follow-up. And with that, I am incredibly pleased to introduce our first speaker, Alexandra Wragge. Alexandra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure to be here and to see everybody virtually, which is what we do these days. I am the president of Trace, and as you heard, we are headquartered in Annapolis, but we have a presence in either through a law firm partner or an actual employee or consultant on the ground in 140 countries. So homegrown, very local, but international at the same time. And I'm going to fly through some of our membership benefits very quickly and then focus on our topic here today, which is evaluating business partners for your international operations. We are a membership organization, and that membership includes the whole suite of compliance tools, multilingual online training, a resource center of local law, so you can go in and see what the restrictions are on having a partner in some of these countries. You're thinking about branching out and you want to have a business partner in Mexico. What are the concerns around whether that'll create a tax liability for you in country? Or are there certifications required? If they used to serve in the government, are there revolving door limitations that you need to be conscious of? Also, gifts and hospitality, a big part of doing business internationally pre-pandemic and again someday is travel, and that involves hospitality, meals out, and exchange of gifts over contract signing, that sort of thing. And so those, most of us at Trace are lawyers. We came from in-house positions, and what we did was we set out to build the resources that we needed most when we were in-house and to make them as cost-effective as possible. But let's turn to due diligence and your third parties internationally. This is an enormous risk area for companies. The Department of Justice loves to tell us that over 70%, by some calculations, over 80% of the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act cases, involve third-party intermediaries, which is the very broad category of business partners, channel partners, consultants, etc., overseas. Pet peeve they often forget to point out that those third parties were usually not acting alone. They were usually acting in collusion with a company's employee or a set of employees. So it isn't as if your company goes out and retains a third-party business partner and then they off on their own, at their own expense and in their own interest, pay bribes on behalf of your company. They're usually doing it in collusion with somebody within the company. So I think it's a little unfortunate that we have pointed to these business partners as this extreme source of risk, which they are, without pointing out that if your own team is trained and monitored appropriately, then it's much more difficult for this to become problematic. We always put up some recent cases just so you can get a sense of the amount of money involved in these cases. We put it in bold to make it easy for you: 22 million, over $1 billion in the case of Ericsson, and a smaller one out of Canada, $375,000. But for companies that still think it's worth playing due diligence roulette and working with unvetted third parties, I think that time has passed. I think it probably passed about a decade ago. And one of the things that we're seeing is our biggest growth area is that middle band of companies, not small companies, but mid-sized companies that are looking for sane, cost-effective solutions to vetting what is very often an enormous number of third parties operating for them overseas. We hear from companies fairly frequently that they can spend $50,000 vetting a partner for them whose total business opportunity is around $50,000. And that clearly doesn't make any sense. So what might due diligence reveal? You're setting out to check out this third party. What are you looking for? What should you be concerned about? What are the infamous red flags when you're dealing with a third party? Clearly past misconduct. If you're dealing with somebody who was indicted for fraud, you're going to want to look into that more carefully, but they're usually a little bit more subtle than that. Questionable financial status. The Department of Justice has said that if your third party is in financial difficulty, chances are greater, you're on notice, that chances are greater that they're going to pay a bribe on your behalf. I'm not sure that business ethics are quite as situational as that, but the Department of Justice isn't interested, in my opinion, on that. They have said that very clearly in the past. Do they appear on any sanctions lists? Your concern about anti-corruption and some of these other legal issues is absolutely secondary to whether you're working with somebody who's on a sanction list. There's no wiggle room with that at all. And so a daily or very frequent regular screening of your third parties to ensure that they are not on a sanctions list is more important really than almost anything else we're going to talk about here. Ties to government officials. You can't hire the wife or the husband of a senior government official and funnel a whole lot of money to them through a consulting agreement with the hope that it influences the government official herself. Conflicting or questionable business information. Are you hearing from one person at the company that there are 3 owners? Another person at the company is referring to a 4th owner. That sort of confusion in their governance documents and in the answers that they're giving you is a considerable concern, and that needs to be run to ground. Are their business registrations current? If they're not prepared to abide by their own laws, then chances of them abiding by US laws like the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act are very small. Negative media reports. Interesting point here. You, of course, need to know if your business partner has been splashed across the headlines with fraud and bribery. At the same time, as a strange hobby of mine when I still traveled, I started asking reporters in developing countries in particular how much it would cost me to place a false story about somebody in their paper. And these were large national papers in some cases. And the answer was an average of about $50 US. So one of the things you have to be alert to is the possibility that compliance is being weaponized. And so you're looking at 2 potential partners to do business for you in Argentina. One of them finds out who their competitor is and places a false story about them in the media. Now you've searched on the media and this person's name has come up with, uses bribes as a part of their marketing strategy. And it's incredibly effective. It's unfair, it's unfortunate, but it's incredibly effective because what happens then, of course, is most companies make the decision that they're just in the too hard to do category. It's going to be too difficult to run to ground whether or not, to prove the negative, whether that story is true. They bump that person out of the competition, and the person who actually placed the story wins. And clearly that's not the right result. But just a note to all of us to be careful about media stories, particularly if they quote anonymous sources, or if it's just a blog posting. You have to note them, you have to look into them, but don't be entirely swayed by the strength of that. Are they reluctant to sign your code of conduct or adopt their own? And what other red flags are there in the process? There's, we've got a brochure on this, happy to make it available. There's an enormous amount of lore around this, much of which will be known to you already. So the TRACE model in all of this is you have to do this. To protect your company, you have to make these inquiries. You have to go through the due diligence process to ensure that you're working with an appropriate business partner. And I should have said at the outset, it's up to you to decide if they're a good business partner from a sales and business perspective. I'm only talking about the compliance portion of this. But what was happening until about 10 years ago was a typical business partner will work with multiple companies. Even in the defense sector, which I came out of, one defense company might work with 10 different agents in a country, but for very specific product lines. And those agents might work with 10 companies at the same time, not tying their fortune to just a single company. So what was happening there was 10 companies were vetting 10 agents 10 times, producing 100 due diligence reports. The expense of that is astronomical for the companies, but what's really horrifying from the perspective of the business partners is they're spending their entire time filling out due diligence forms because they've got to do it 10 times in the course of a year. They're all very, very similar because best practices have sort of forced us all into the same, appropriately, forced us all into the same kind of bandwidth of due diligence. It was taking too much money for the companies and too much time for the third parties. So we said, well, let's flip that. And instead of that kind of multiple effort, let's take all of the agents on the right side of this, all the business partners, and have them do a single robust due diligence based on these heavily benchmarked best practices. And let's make those reports available at no cost to all of those 10 companies. So instead of 100 reports, then we have a single report satisfying, or 10 reports, one for each of the agents, satisfying the needs of all of the parties. And we can keep it up to date because we have the agents' full attention. Most of the companies now are saying, we're not going to work with you if you don't keep this information up to date. It's in our database, and we are sanction screening every single day. So if you pull a TRACE report, and again, it's publicly available, it's free to the companies here, you pull up one of those reports and you know that they have gone through a sanction screening that morning, right? And you also know that their media search is being updated annually, their ownership information is being updated annually. They've been trained, they've been put through our anti-bribery online training in one of 30 languages. So it becomes a business credential for them and a cost savings for companies. This is a list, I won't go through it all, but this is everything that goes into a TRACE certification due diligence report. I always try to pause here and say, clearly we are not certifying, virtue. We're not certifying their purity of heart. It is, a fairly mechanical process where we say, we need all of this information. We'll evaluate all of this information. We'll reduce it to an executive summary. You get all of the background, but we reduce it to an executive summary right up front that says, you know what? They were in a media report, and this is how we resolved that. Or they are the spouse of a government official, but that government official doesn't have any influence over the procurement process, or whatever that high-level analysis is. It's a very generic analysis because we don't know your industry, and we had one report. It's a favorite example of an agent, a business partner in Nigeria, and he had shares in the national oil company. Well, that's really interesting if you're ExxonMobil, but voting shares. But it is much less interesting if you are Pfizer, pharmaceutical company. So each company needs to look at that top-level executive report and make a decision for themselves about the risk that it presents for their company. But the third parties love this, the business partners love this because it has reduced their workload. But I'm still out here, 10 years later saying, use this. This is available to you. It's online. There's no charge associated with it. You can use it for your low risk third parties. You can use it exclusively. If you have a high risk third party, you might use it as an initial check so you don't get too far down into an RFP and then find out that they're on a sanctions list. So there are a number of ways to use this, and our goal here is to make transparency and doing the right thing simpler for companies that are operating internationally. This is just an example of the intermediary directory. You can go in. Members can search by industry and they can do a more granular search, but the public can still search by country. So if you have a pop-up opportunity somewhere, again, I have no idea whether there'll be a good business fit for you, but if you find somebody in our database in that country, they've been screened against sanctions, trained for anti-bribery, their due diligence is already completed, and it's a pretty good starting point. Publicly available resources, just a few other things that I will flag for you. The Trace Bribery Risk Matrix. If you're going into a new country, you want to find out what the risk is in that country. This matrix was heavily vetted. We had a team of academics working on it, and it assesses the likelihood that you are going to be shaken down for a bribe in a given market. So, for example, we've seen a high, strong, positive correlation between the number of signatures required for example, a license, and the opportunity for a bribe demand. So we looked at the amount of red tape in country, and that's one of our factors. In Nigeria, it takes 92 signatures to offload cargo at the port of Lagos. Maybe each of those 92 people is a good and honest government official, but 92 separate opportunities definitely enhances the likelihood that you're going to be asked for a bribe at some point in that process. So we capture that information and help you to allocate your legal and compliance resources. So, if you're going into Nigeria, you might say, I really need somebody on the ground in that port. I'm going to need to pay more attention to what happens there than, for example, UAE, where customs clearance is now entirely electronic. It's entirely online. There isn't even an opportunity for a bribe. Trace Compendium, you can sign up for that, and that'll give you updates whenever there is a new anti-bribery case. Just drop it into your mailbox. Only 10, 15, 20 of those a year, so it's not a great volume, but it'll make sure that you find out on the day if there is a new anti-bribery case. And then the Trace e-government portal, that's exactly what I was referring to a moment ago with the UAE. Our company said, we see the opportunity to reduce risk to our company if we can use e-government, if we can apply for permits online, customs clearance online, but there is no centralized database of that information. So we hired a consultant for 2 years. We locked him in a very small room, and we said, find out all government services worldwide that are available online. We worked with the World Bank because the ease of doing business looks at that as well. And we built this portal. So if you're going into a new market and you think you've got to be thinking about things like permits, registration, customs clearance, all the way up through to RFPs, you can go on here and find out what can be done remotely, particularly relevant during a pandemic, and safely and without bribery risk. So that is an enormous amount of information in very short order, but perhaps we can make it through our presentations more generally, and then if there are questions, I would be delighted to respond to them, Rebecca.
Thank you, Alexandra, so much for that. And I do hope, I've seen a couple of questions come in, and I appreciate those questions. We'll get to those in a moment. But I would like to invite Kim. The floor is yours. Take us through some of your experience with Consul.
Absolutely. So I am the Director of Sales at Consul Pharmaceuticals. Just a brief background on Consul. We have 2 brands. The first is the Consul dietary supplements, which are primarily focused on digestive health, and we have the Sitzmarks medical device brand. The scope of our products range from digestive health products to OTC products to the medical device, which is actually a prescription medical device. So when we are evaluating potential partners for our international distribution, we need to take into account the scope and the channels that these products will be sold in. So the first challenge is when you're entering a new market is to really define to you what makes a good partner. What are you looking for in a partner in this market? What are you available to offer in the partner relationship, and what do you need from your partner? We primarily deal with distribution partners, distributors, potentially agents, depending on the product and the market that we're entering. The first step internally that we do is have any potential business partner fill out a pretty general distributor questionnaire. This gives us some basic background information on the companies that we would potentially be entering discussions or negotiations with. The types of information that we generally receive from this questionnaire are the names of the principals or officers of the company, which is important as we're doing background checks. The structure of the company, we're looking for sales and marketing type companies. So we want to know what channels the sales team sells into. Are they selling to retail facilities? Are they selling to hospitals? What's their distribution method? At a broad level, this is important for us as we're evaluating these distributors as well. We want to know generally the amount of staff they have. If they're doing all of their sales and marketing internally, what's the size of their sales team? If they're having outside sales agents, how many sales agents do they have, and what's the scope of their coverage into the potential market? We look for references from the companies, business references, credit references, and make sure that we're kind of in alignment on regulatory as well. Do they have a regulatory department, and what's their process for customs clearance? So once we kind of have a great background, a broad background on the way that the distributor operates, we kind of ask them as well for a broad market analysis. And once we know we're aligned and the structure is a match for what we're looking for in the territory, we'll move on to really make sure the distribution network is established and they're selling into the types of facilities that we need. For example, our medical device, which is a prescription medical device, would be sold more to the physicians directly or in a hospital environment. However, our dietary supplements would be sold into a retail environment. So do they have the correct sales channel set up for the type of environment that we're selling into? We also need to ensure, specifically for Consol, that they have a good internal regulatory department. We rely on our distributors to really be the feet on the street from the regulatory perspective. We're clearly well-versed in the US FDA requirements, but we're not international regulatory experts. So we rely on either our distributors to, to help us with this, or we use some outside consulting services. Before we get too far into the process with the negotiations with this potential distributor, we kind of need to do a gut check as well and make sure that the margins work on all parties. Are we going to be able to sell the product in the market for the price that we need? Is the distributor going to get a big enough piece of the pie? If there's a wholesaler involved, are they going to get a piece of the pie? And make sure that from a top-down approach that everybody's covered and we're not going to find a surprise 3 or 4 months down the road when we're ready to make our first sale that the pricing just doesn't work. And then we also need the distributors specifically to identify if there's any localization that needs to occur. For example, we may need to change the color of a label depending on the area that we're entering. And we really look for our distribution partners to provide feedback on ways to enhance the product to help it succeed in their territory. So once you know what you're looking for in a partner, there's a few ways to go about finding some potential partners. The first way that I would recommend is the Gold Key service. This is a service that provides companies with matchmaking appointments. Usually I think it's 3 to 5 interested partners in the specific market. This is provided by, I believe, the Commerce Department, and this is a really nice way for somebody that's sort of new into the territory to vet out any distributors that may be not forthright in the information that they're giving you. The Gold Key service, the employees that are performing this will have interviews with the potential distributors or potential business partners. They'll take into account all of the criteria that you provide them. This is the type of organization that I need. They have to have X, Y, and Z, and they'll make sure that all of the needs are met and bring you some potential distribution partners or partnerships that will meet your criteria. International trade shows are also a great way to fill your sales funnel. You can use these for lead generation, or you can go to meet with potential business partners. We've done that both ways. We've definitely used international trade shows to build the top of funnel. We've met with distributors at international trade shows, and the face-to-face meetings are always a great way to make sure that the business plan is on track and we're moving things forward. We've recently used the Export MD grant to meet with one of our distributors about a year ago, actually in February of last year, which was a really great resource for us to go and meet with our current and new distributors in the Middle East. There's also trade associations that you would want to look into depending on the territory that you're entering. For example, in Europe, we look at the European medical distributor associations and make sure that anybody that we're looking at there in those territories are members of any appropriate trade associations as well. One service I do want to mention is the company profile, and this is a service offered by the U.S. Commercial Service. This is a really economic way to get a background check really performed on a potential distributor. They'll look at the background of the company, they'll look at the product information, they'll contact those references that you got early on in the questionnaire or in the initial discussions with the distributor. They'll look at the reputation of the company. They'll do kind of a broad sweep and cover a lot of the areas that you may not have the capabilities in-house to cover. There is a small fee affiliated with this. I believe it's under $1,000, and it is limited to small businesses, but it's a great resource as well. So why is it important to make sure that your potential business partner is who you think they are? You definitely don't want to get burned. If you're really excited about entering a new target market and you're putting the time in and the effort in to develop a relationship with your potential business partner, which is not a fast process in most cases. It definitely takes some time to develop these relationships. You don't want to find out after the fact that they're misleading you in any way, and you've lost all of that time in developing the relationship. Lost time is lost money, and you you don't want to lose the time and money. You also could have a potential situation where there's fraud and you lose product or you don't get paid. So you want to make sure you're covering all of your bases from the front. There's also potential for damaged reputation, and this could not only impact you in the new targeted area. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, we had a new distribution relationship with a company that was selling in their territory. And we found out after a couple of the first shipments that there was actually instances of diversion. So we were shipping the product and it was coming back into the United States and being sold at a lesser price. And this it got back to some of our retail partners in the United States. And so it was not a pleasant situation to try to resolve the pricing issues. But there's definitely a lot of areas where these relationships could go wrong, or they're not being upfront and honest about certain situations. So you want to make sure that you're really doing your homework on any of these potential business partners prior to engaging in a contract or in a long-term relationship. Rebecca, that's back to you.
All right, Kim, thank you so much for that insider perspective from a company. So Alexandra, if you can join us again as well. I think that what we've done this afternoon so far is set up some frameworks. This is one, why doing due diligence is important. This is what can happen if you don't. Both from the perspective of someone who does due diligence, this is what you do to help companies, as well as from the perspective of a company and how they have maneuvered through doing these background checks. We have a number of questions, and they're a little bit all over the board. So I'm just going to kind of take them one by one and direct them how I think that you might be able to answer, but jump in as you will. The first one's a little bit of a doozy, if I can say that. So the first one is, and Kim, I think this ties to something you said, the corruption can happen even if you've done due diligence and background checks. So how do you train your internal team to recognize and avoid corruption in practice while it's occurring, even if you've already done a due diligence report?
That is a good question. We tackle this in a couple of ways. From a financial perspective, we actually require all of our international partners to prepay for orders, and we follow the order through through customs clearance. So we know exactly where the product is at all times, that it's been cleared, and we request sales reports, quarterly sales reports from all of our distributors, so we know who they're selling it to and at what quantities, to try to minimize any cloudiness as far as where our products are.
Rebecca, can I jump in there for just a second?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, one of the things that we do when we're doing training with our companies is making sure that they have practiced saying no, because they will get asked. If you're doing business internationally, you will get asked. And you don't want on your first international trip to be faced with one of these demands and to be left really flat-footed. And it's almost a sort of role playing where you give people kind of diversionary tactics. So if a government official is standing in front of you saying, well, I expect to be taken care of, they never say a bribe, I expect to be taken care of here, you've got a whole arsenal of responses, like, the most benign is, just ignoring it, willful ignorance, right? Well, I thought for a moment there you might be asking me for something, but of course that's not the kind of market, your country welcomes business and you can blow past it. That's very often not successful. One of the ones I use a lot is I put U.S. Embassy in my cell phone, just the words, and I'll say, that I'm sure what you're asking for is perfectly appropriate. Let me just check with the embassy, and if they're all right with it, I'm all right with it. And I can tell you it just disappears, right? The demand goes away. And we do, whole afternoons of training like this because it's just really difficult. You don't want, no can be a relationship ending word, of course, and you don't want to just shut it down. You certainly don't want to entertain it, but you've got to find some middle ground where you can get around their demand without giving into it and still preserve the relationship, particularly if it's a government official you're going to have to deal with over and over again.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The idea of role plays is a great way. Once you practice, you learn, you know the skill. That's great. I appreciate that.
We also incorporate in our distribution agreements, any of the signed contracts with the distributors, that if there is an instance where there's a request, that we can end the relationship immediately with no notice given, like it's an immediate end to the relationship.
Okay, so that's an escape clause that you have essentially that it will hopefully dissuade anyone from even trying or bringing that up. That's another great idea. Another question is a little bit more nuts and bolts. Can you break it down? What are 3 steps I should take to develop a due diligence program internally to my company? What are 3 things that someone should do?
Who would you like to take that, Rebecca?
Either of you, both of you, whoever's got a great answer to start.
I'll start and then I'll hand it over to you, Kim, so that you're the expert. When we see companies setting up programs, you need to have a list of your third parties, and you can't really do anything on a generalized, comprehensive basis if you don't know who all your third parties are, who all your business partners are. So it usually takes about 6 months. Work with accounts payable. If you say to your team, nobody's getting paid after 6 months if they're not on this list, that list is developed very, very quickly. If you are paying them, they should be on that list. So first of all, the list. Second is a questionnaire. We've got samples. There's samples on the web. Lots of examples of what you should be asking, but particularly emphasizing beneficial ownership, because you can't do meaningful sanction screening if you don't know who actually owns the company, if you just have a shell company name. And then the third is I would roll out online training to everybody on that list. It's a great way to actually convey your commitment to the issue, but it's also a good shield if something goes wrong to say, you know, we vetted them with this questionnaire and then we provided them all with anti-bribery training. They understood our commitment to this issue. So if you're only giving me 3 things, those are my 3.
That's it. It's just 3. Thank you. Kim, do you want to add to that? No. Okay. Kim, the one thing that I will say that Alexandra said is that you talked specifically about having a questionnaire, something
Yes.
that Consul does already, and that's great. It maps on. I'm glad our experts are on the same page. That's great. Another question that I have here is, what happens if a TRACE certified entity is added to a watch list after review has been completed?
Oh, okay. So great question. If you access a TRACE certified third party through our database, they will be linked to you. You don't have to, you know, there's a number of different ways to do it. But if you access them through our database, again, there's no cost for that. They're linked to you. So if they appear on a watch list 6 weeks from now, you will get a notice of that. So if you don't go through our database, through our third-party management system, then you would have to be screening them on your own, which is, you know, it's just an unfortunate additional step as we're already doing it. But you can only have the benefit of our daily screening if you are linked to them in the database.
I see. Okay, great. I have a couple of questions here pertaining to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So if you have a case, what are the things that you need to prepare to bring to that case for your defense? And another question that's related to this is whether or not TRACE certification can be a part of the evidence that you bring. So I think that maybe let's back up a little bit. And Alexandra, I don't know if you want to cover this, but can we talk about FCPA, what that means if we're talking about a case and what happens there, and then how to prepare for it?
Yeah, sure. Kim, did you want to jump in first, or shall I start?
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So typically cases come to light under the FCPA because there's a whistleblower or because of self-disclosure. The company finds something themselves and takes it into the government. If you are in that category, you have already lawyered up, you've already got the counsel that you need, and they're going to guide you through this process. If it's a whistleblower or a surprise, and the way a surprise comes about very often is if another company is using one of your business partners and it breaks in the news that that company and that business partner were in trouble, and you know you use that business partner, you should expect the Department of Justice to be at your front door fairly quickly. The short version of what you should do next is make sure you can take credit for everything you have done. One of the biggest concerns that I have, especially about mid-sized companies, is they're doing a whole lot, right? Their CEO is sending out a message on email that says, we have zero tolerance for bribery. Under no circumstances will we entertain a business opportunity at the risk of a bribe. That goes out to everybody, but nobody saves that, or nobody, sort of flags that as part of the compliance program. They're doing online training for all of their employees and possibly all of their business partners, but they're not keeping really adequate records. They're doing the sorts of questionnaires that Kim talked about and I talked about, but they're tossing them all in. After they review them, they're tossing them all in a box somewhere, and it's not a living program. So bringing all of those pieces together and making sure you take credit for everything that you have done. And then the other thing is taking advantage, if you have internal audit, taking advantage of the role that they play, because bribes are, we know this, they're typically paid in round numbers. They're very often paid in US dollar equivalent, regardless of the local currency. Bribe payers who think they're very clever will very often call it either consulting fees or translation fees. Those seem to be the two most popular. If your auditors are trained on those things, they can be watching for them in advance so that you're not surprised by the Department of Justice or the SEC, but that you're a couple of steps ahead of that.
I'm on mute. Sorry about that. Kim, did you want to add anything?
I'm also muted. No, that is good.
Great. Kim, I'm going to throw, I think what's going to be our last question to you first, if I can.
Sure.
So the question is about the Transparency International Index. And the question really is, how does this fit into the conversation? So I'm assuming that people know what this is. And the person asking the question asks, is this a good indicator of when an evaluation should be done? And so, Kim, I'm asking you this first, as someone directly in a company, representing a company. Is this something that you look at as maybe a first step to determine should you do an evaluation or not even bother?
And I think you should do an evaluation all the time. Always.
So you broke up a little bit, but just to reiterate, what I think I heard is that regardless of what this index says, you should do an evaluation every single time.
Yes.
Okay. Alexandra, anything that you want to add either to the index itself or that comment?
The TI index is very good. It assesses perceptions of general corruption, pediatricians shaking down a mother, that sort of thing. I mentioned the TRACE matrix earlier, and that's really a business focused. How likely is a company to be shaken down? So while I really admire TI and the work that they have done in promoting awareness of this issue, most of our companies use our matrix because it refers very specifically not to corrupt police or corrupt judges, but very specifically to the procurement process and the risk you're going to see. So a lot of companies use one or the other of these to rank their third parties, right? They're not all going to be equally risky, and you're going to want to do a greater inquiry or perhaps more frequent inquiry at the higher risk than at the lower risk. And either of those indices is a fine place to start. You might also look at deal size. So geography, deal size, and whether your customers are primarily government customers tend to be the three things that people use as a part of their risk assessment. If I may for just a moment, because I forgot the second part of your question, Rebecca, you asked about TRACE certification in an FCPA case. Obviously, no due diligence is going to save you if one of your employees knowingly and deliberately paid a bribe, or if you were just indifferent to your third party. If you said, get the business however you need to, we're not bothered with the details, you're not going to get off the hook, no matter how much due diligence you did in those cases. But a good, robust, consistence important, due diligence across the board is what is expected of you. And we've had well over a dozen companies who used TRACE certified due diligence get declinations from the government. That is, the government showed up at the front door, did their entire inquiry, and then did not proceed further. So that's obviously one data point in probably hundreds of data points, but we feel pretty good about that.
Okay. Great. And actually, I'm going to beg your indulgence, Kim and Alexandra. One more comment has come in. So we're going to take this before we move to the next part, if you're okay with that. And it says, maybe this is more than a comment than a question, but this person has experience with commerce and has said, is your prospective partner a member of the American Chamber of Commerce, meaning they have a higher ethical standard or compliance? Do they represent other U.S. or Western companies? Might be another criterion to think about. What are your thoughts on that?
Kim?
I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, I think what the question or the comment maybe is saying is that another way to start to get to know who your potential partner would be is, one, are they a member of the American Chamber of Commerce, whatever location that they're in? And do they potentially represent or work with other U.S. or Western, in this case, companies? Is that something that you consider?
Yes, I would consider that. Yes.
Yeah, I would completely agree. If we are checking references on a third party, on a business partner, and their references are, gold-plated American companies, and they're great references, that has a real impact. It's not, it doesn't end the inquiry, but that has a real impact. If, on the other hand, they have three references from a country, China's an example. China has never prosecuted a Chinese company for bribery overseas. Never. There's not a single case. So if the three references are from Chinese companies, they may still be, a great and honorable company, but we're talking about companies that don't have an experience of the FCPA, that don't have an experience of compliance. And so, we are going to weight that differently. Absolutely.
Mhm. Great. Okay, so that really does speak to the idea of getting references, asking your friends, asking your peers, asking other industry, sometimes competitors as well as collaborators. That's a really great point. I'm glad our one of our attendees brought that up. So moving ahead, I did promise to introduce 3 key programs from the Map-It Alliance partners that could help you with either this part of the export process or potentially some other parts. I will say here that Kim has really done my job already, because Kim mentioned 2 of the programs here, and I'm sure that Maryland Department of Commerce and the USEAC are delighted to hear that you, one, have used both of the products and the services that they've asked me to mention here today, and that you've been successful using those. So I will mention 2 things here before I talk about some of the center's programs. The first is the Export MD grant offered by the Maryland Department of Commerce. And this is a grant that is available for eligible Maryland companies that can apply for up to $5,000 in grant funding reimbursement for an export marketing initiative. And applications are considered on a monthly basis. Now, Kim mentioned this resource in relation to using it for travel reimbursement to trade shows. Even though trade shows are a little bit limited right now, given the pandemic, the Export MD grant is still available for non-travel related expenses related to global marketing. So please do take a look at that. Kim also mentioned the International Company Profile Service, which comes from the U.S. Commercial Service or the U.S. Export Assistance Center in Baltimore. It's 2 names for one place. And this service will provide you with a comprehensive background report on foreign companies. Some of the things that includes are general business information on the foreign company, background and product information, financial data or credit worthiness, some reference checks, and there are even some site visits available through that service as well. And finally, a pair of programs I'll mention here come from the Center for Global Business. And they are both summer opportunities to work with students, opportunities to have your international business needs addressed by the high achieving students here at the school. The first is the Virtual Global Marketing Internship Program, where a pair of undergrad students will work with you part-time over the summer. And they'll work on website globalization, social media strategy, marketing analytics, digital marketing, really anything that you need within this realm of global marketing. We do the paperwork. We recruit and train the students, and they work with you as part of your team. The second program is consulting. It's a little bit different in that it involves you giving us a problem or a question, let's say, that needs to be solved. A team of MBA students will work with you on that issue throughout the summer and present you with strategic recommendations on how your company should move forward. And some examples of this might be what countries are best suited for your next global expansion move, or how you might successfully enter a certain market. And again, we'll train the students, we'll recruit the students, and you'll give us the problem. And honestly, Kim, you should have talked about this too, because I know.
I did. I wish I did, but we have used this program, and the work that was produced by the students was phenomenal. I highly recommend it. Very top notch, very professional. They did a fantastic job.
That's fantastic. I'm sure that the students would love to hear that. And the thing that I'll point out about what Kim is actually demonstrating is that Kim and Council have been very savvy about identifying the resources that are available, not just through the Map-It Alliance, but to support exporters in the state, and has tapped into these resources to be successful. So Kim, I actually commend you on that. My joking aside about having you talk about consulting. So in a nutshell, these programs, consulting involves MBA students working on a customized solution to a problem you're facing. Internships involve undergraduate students working with you on global marketing as part of your team. And both programs do have a fee to cover student stipends and operational expenses. And this is the other great thing about the Map-It Alliance, is that the programs are reimbursable under the Export MD grant. And that's another way that we really come together to support the export ecosystem. Applications for these programs are open now, and for the internship and consulting, we'd like to have those in by April 23rd, if you can. So the link that you see on the website, or I'm sorry, on the screen in front of you as well, should take you directly to the Map-It Alliance website, which is hosted on the DEC website. And through there, you can link to all of these resources, additional resources, and to each one of the Map It Alliance partners directly as well. And finally, I did promise to provide contact information both for our presenters as well as to all of the Map It Alliance partners in case you want to reach us after today's event. And I really do encourage you to follow up with Jessica Reynolds if you're interested in the Export MD grant, or Aisha Jones if you're interested in the international company profile, or certainly with me if you're interested in following up on internships or consulting. And with that, I would like to thank again Alexandra Kim for spending part of your afternoon with us. This has been incredible. It's been such an honor to share the stage with you. And this has been an incredibly insightful and informational session today. I'd also like to thank all of our attendees for joining us for the event. Please don't forget to take the survey in the pop-up window after you exit out of WebEx. And if you're struggling with just how to conduct due diligence, please be sure to reach out so that we can assist you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.